The sun was setting over Jerusalem. My father David had built this wealthy city over 40 years, but my own darkness was just beginning. The mighty king of Israel, the man who chased God's heart, was now frail and fading fast. Palace curtains fluttered like ghosts in the wind, while a young servant girl, Abishag the Shunammite, desperately tried to warm my father's shivering bones. A brutal shift was coming. The greedy eyes of the royal court stopped watching his deathbed and turned to us, the remaining sons hungry for the crown. Who would wear the crown? Who could carry that crushing legacy? I was terrified. The palace air felt heavy with deadly secrets and sudden betrayals. In the dark corridors, whispers and shadows were already turning into very real threats. My identity was slipping away. The future of our entire nation hung in the balance. You and I are going to relive my story, how I, Solomon, survived this terror to find God's wisdom and lead Israel into its golden age, an era nobody would ever forget. My father was fading. In 1 Kings chapter 1, the ancient text reads, "Now King David was very old, and although they covered him with blankets, he could not get warm." As my father lay wasting away, my older brother saw his chance. He decided to steal the throne right out from under me. Adonijah, born to Haggith, was dangerously handsome and deeply ambitious. Since Absalom was dead, he was the oldest left. He firmly believed the crown was his. In 1 Kings chapter 1, the text says, "Now Adonijah, whose mother was Haggith, put himself forward and said, 'I will be king.' So he prepped chariots and horses, ordering 50 men to run ahead of him. My father never stopped him or asked, 'Why do you behave as you do?' He was striking to look at, born right after Absalom. To secure his power, Adonijah threw a massive feast, inviting my brothers and Judah's most powerful leaders. But 1 Kings chapter 1 reveals who was left out in the cold. Zadok the priest, Benaiah, Nathan the prophet, Shimei, Ray, and my father's loyal special guard refused to join Adonijah. So he slaughtered sheep, cattle, and fattened calves at the stone of Zoheleth near Enrogel. He invited all my other brothers and the royal officials of Judah, but he made sure to exclude Nathan, Benaiah, the elite guard, and me. He left me completely isolated. Smelling the danger, the prophet Nathan ran straight to my mother Bathsheba. In 1 Kings chapter 1, he asked her, "Have you not heard that Adonijah has become king, and our Lord David knows nothing about it?" Nathan told my mother to rush to the king and hold him to his sacred promise, that I would be the one to succeed him. My mother approached my dying father and said, as recorded in 1 Kings, "My lord, you yourself swore to me, your servant, by the Lord your God, saying, 'Solomon your son shall be king after me, taking my throne.'" She then exposed Adonijah's treason right then and there. She finished with a desperate, heartfelt plea. "My lord the king, the eyes of all Israel are burning into you, waiting to learn who will actually sit on the throne of my lord the king after him. Otherwise, the second my lord the king is laid to rest with his ancestors, my son Solomon and I will be slaughtered as criminals." While she spoke, Nathan walked in, confirming my worst fears. My father acted fast. In 1 Kings chapter 1, he swore, "As surely as the Lord lives, who has pulled me out of every trouble, I will surely carry out this very day what I swore to you by the Lord, the God of Israel. Solomon, your son, shall be king after me, and will sit on my throne in my place." He ordered them to anoint me king that exact second. In 1 Kings we read, "Zadok the priest took the horn of oil from the sacred tent and anointed Solomon. They blew the ram's horn and the crowd screamed, "Long live King Solomon!" The crowd surged behind me, playing pipes and cheering so violently the ground literally shook beneath my feet. When my brother Adonijah heard the uproar, he was terrified and fled to the altar. You and I both know fear makes men desperate. I chose to show him mercy, saying in 1 Kings, "If he proves himself a man of honor, not one hair on his head will fall to the ground. But if evil is found in him, he dies." With those words, I became the absolute king of Israel. Knowing his lungs were giving out, my father called me in for his last, chilling instructions. In 1 Kings chapter 2, he croaked out, "I am about to go the way of all the earth. So be strong, act like a man, do exactly what the Lord your God requires. Walk in blind obedience to him, keeping all his strict decrees and commands, his laws and rules, exactly as written in the law of Moses. Do this so you survive and prosper in whatever you touch." He reminded me of God's heavy promise in 1 Kings. If your bloodline watches how they live, and if they walk faithfully before me with all their heart and soul, you will never lack a man on the throne of Israel. Then his tone shifted to cold political revenge. Regarding Joab, who had slaughtered 2 commanders during peacetime, my father instructed me in 1 Kings, "Deal with him using your wisdom, but do not let his gray head go down to the grave in peace." As for the sons of Barzillai, who hid him during Absalom's bloody rebellion, my father commanded, "Show deep kindness to the sons of Barzillai of Gilead. Let them eat at your royal table, because they stood by me when I was running for my life from your brother." Finally, regarding Shimei, the man who cursed him while he fled, my father warned, "Do not consider him innocent. You are a smart man. You will figure out exactly what to do with him. Bring his gray head down to the grave in blood." Those violent final words forced me to learn the brutal balance of royal justice. Soon after, just as the scripture records, my father David breathed his last and was buried in his city. With my father permanently resting in the dark earth, I was utterly alone, forced to secure my own power. 1 Kings says, "So Solomon sat on the throne and his rule was established." But my first real threat? Adonijah again. My brother cornered my mother with a highly suspicious request. The ancient text reads, "Now Adonijah, the son of Haggith, went to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother." My mother was wary. "Do you come in peace?" she asked. "Yes, in peace," he lied, before adding, "I have something to say." "Say it," she shot back. Adonijah looked at her and said, "As you well know, this kingdom was mine. Every Israelite looked to me as their true king. But the winds shifted, and the kingdom went to my brother, given to him by the Lord. Now I have just one small request. Please, do not turn me away." "Make your request," she said. He smiled and said, "Ask King Solomon, because he won't refuse you, to give me Abishag the Shunammite as my wife." What do you and I make of this trap? I knew this was no innocent request. In our ancient world, claiming the dead king's concubine meant claiming the crown. My heart hammered when Solomon heard the news. His wrath was immediate. The sacred text records his chilling response. Why ask for Abishag for Adonijah? You might as well hand him my throne. The tension was suffocating. He is my older brother, backed by Abiathar the priest and Joab, he muttered. I watched Solomon's face harden as he swore a dark oath. May God strike me down. If Adonijah hasn't just bought his own death with this demand, As surely as the Lord breathes. I felt the cold reality of royal justice. The God who secured me on my father David's throne, Adonijah, dies today. Right then, I realized how quickly a life vanishes when power feels threatened. The archives confirm it. Solomon gave the nod to his executioner, Benaiah, a swift blade in the dark, and Adonijah was gone forever. The purge didn't stop there. Next came Abiathar, the priest who backed the wrong side. I heard the king banish him. Go back to your fields in Anathoth. You deserve death, but I'll spare you today because you carried the sacred ark for my father and suffered with him. Just like that, I watched a lifelong priest stripped of his identity and exiled into the wasteland. An ancient curse from Shiloh fulfilled. When Joab heard the news of this bloody purge, panic finally broke him. He ran to the sacred tent, desperately clutching the altar's horns. I thought sanctuary would save him, but Solomon ordered the kill right there in the holy place. Benaiah marched in, struck the old commander down, and buried him in the barren wilderness. The isolation of his end sent shivers down my spine. Then, Solomon's gaze locked onto Shimei. I expected more blood, but instead, he locked him in a psychological cage, house arrest right here in Jerusalem. The order was absolute. Build your house here. Stay put. Do not step past the city lines. Cross the Kidron Valley, and you are a dead man. Your blood is your own. For 3 years, I watched him pace that invisible prison until temptation won. He chased runaway servants to Gath. When he crept back, Solomon was waiting. The ancient text records the brutal, inevitable sentence handed down. Again, Benaiah drew his heavy sword, and Shimei fell dead. Standing in that silent, blood-stained throne room, I realized the kingdom was finally locked in Solomon's iron grip. Every rival was erased. I watched a man build absolute authority out of pure, calculated ruthlessness. The dust settled, and a new era began. The records say he loved the Lord, clinging to the heavy, complicated legacy left by his father David to guide him. But he still carried a shadow, burning incense on the forbidden high places. One morning, I followed his royal procession to Gibeon. The scriptures capture the weight of that journey. Gibeon wasn't just another altar. It was the ultimate high place, a site of spiritual gravity. And 1,000 offerings burned, filling the sky with thick smoke. And as darkness fell, the veil between worlds tore. In the dead of night, the Lord invaded his dreams with an impossible test. Ask for whatever you want. I marvel at how deeply his answer stripped his soul bare. He confessed his terror to the divine. You made me king, replacing a legend. But I feel like a lost child crushed by this weight. You and I know that exact fear. I am drowning in this sea of chosen people, a nation too massive, too fractured for one mind to hold. Give me a discerning heart to navigate this chaos, to know light from dark. Because who could possibly carry this burden alone? It was a profound cry for identity. He didn't beg for gold or a sword to crush his enemies. He asked for the wisdom to truly see. The divine presence resonated through the night. Because you chose this, and rejected the ego's trap of endless life, vast wealth, or the bloody end of your rivals, seeking only to understand justice, I will grant it. I'm tearing away your blindness, giving you a mind so deep and penetrating that history will never see another soul like yours. And the empty shadows you ignored, I will give you those too. Wealth and glory beyond measure. No monarch alive will touch your shadow. Walk my path, hold tight to my laws like your father David, and time itself will be yours. The Creator didn't just mend his fragmented soul with ancient wisdom, he poured out unparalleled worldly power. The one catch? Don't lose yourself. Soon enough, I watched that new profound insight get shoved to the absolute brink. The archives detail a brutal dispute. Two marginalized women, outcasts driven by desperation, dragged their broken lives right up to the foot of his throne. I heard the first woman's voice crack in the massive hall. "My lord, we share a roof, isolated. I gave birth with only her in the room." 3 days later, she delivered a son, too. Just us. Swallowed by the silence of those walls. Nobody else saw what happened in the dark. In the black of night, her body smothered her own infant. Trapped in her grief, she crept over, stealing my living child right from my side while I slept. She pressed my breathing boy to her chest and left her cold tragedy in my arms. When dawn broke and I went to nurse him, he was dead. But as the morning light hit his face, a mother's instinct screamed, "This lifeless shell wasn't mine." Then the second woman lashed out, desperate and terrified. "Liar! The living, breathing boy is mine!" The first screamed back, "No, the corpse belongs to you." "He's mine!" They tore at each other before the throne, a nightmare puzzle of identity. No witnesses, just raw, bitter trauma colliding in the court. I braced for a standard ruling, but Solomon dug into the human psyche. "Bring me a sword," he commanded. The guards handed him the cold steel. The hall froze as he declared, "Cut the living boy in half. Share the flesh." It was a horrifying bluff, designed to rip the buried truth out of their souls. The real mother snapped. The ancient records tell us love hijacked her terror. Her gut wrenched for her baby, and she threw herself before him, weeping, "My lord, give her the breathing boy, just let him live." But the other woman's heart had turned to stone. "If I can't have him, neither will you. Slice him open." Solomon lowered the blade. "Give the boy to the first woman. She gave up her claim to save his life. She is his mother." I stood there, utterly paralyzed by the sheer, piercing depth of his judgment. Like a shockwave, the story shattered the nation's doubts. We all felt a profound, holy terror, realizing divine insight was actively cutting through our lies to deliver justice. That ruling became legend. You and I must see. This ancient psychological map isn't abstract. It's our own mirror. I watched him solve real, bleeding human problems. You and I know how easy it is to hide our sins. But the king pierced right through our psychology without needing proof. I stood in that court, trembling. The real mother chose to lose her baby to a stranger just to keep him breathing. A raw, desperate love. But that other woman? She wanted the infant sliced in half rather than lose her pride. Her cold heart terrified me. Soon our kingdom exploded in power, and the king built a massive, suffocating bureaucracy. 1 Kings chapter 4 lists the men who held our leashes. King Solomon ruled every corner of Israel, and these were the elites he chose. Uriah, son of Zadok, was priest. Tehoreph and Ahijah, sons of Shisha, acted as scribes. Jehoshaphat, son of Ahil, kept the heavy records. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, commanded our soldiers. Zadok and Abiah served as priests. Adariah, son of Nathan, ran the officers. And Zabud, son of Nathan? He was the king's friend. Managed the palace, while Adonam, son of Abda, squeezed us in the labor camps. King David was different. David was a warrior who bled with us. But Solomon was a cold, calculating manager. He boxed us into a strict system. Priests for God, scribes for the ink, a recorder for our biblical history, a general for our blood, officers taking our crops, close advisors, and a ruthless tax collector. His sharpest cut was dividing our sacred land into 12 new tax zones, each ruled by a governor. It felt like erasing who we were. 1 Kings chapter 4 says Solomon appointed 12 men over Israel to feed his massive palace. Each governor bled his district dry for 1 full month every single year. This 12-zone grid erased our ancient tribes entirely. Our bloodlines didn't matter anymore, only our geography and what wealth we could produce. We had to feed the royal machine 1 month a year. They called it fair taxation, but to me, it felt like a slow exile from my own heritage. 1 Kings 4:20 shows the result of this machine. Judah and Israel multiplied like sand on the shore. We were eating, drinking, and laughing out loud in the streets. Solomon's shadow stretched over every kingdom, from the great river down through Philistine territory, reaching all the way to the harsh border of Egypt. These conquered nations brought heavy tribute, serving him until his last breath. Israel bathed in a strange, heavy peace. We felt safe. We had full bellies and loud parties. His vast administration pumped wealth through the land, keeping the golden machine running perfectly. It fed the palace, but trickled down to us commoners too. Under his crown, Israel stretched further across the map than ever before. 1 Kings 4:21 repeats this heavy truth. Solomon held absolute power over all the kingdoms, from the river to the Philistine dirt, right to Egypt's edge. They dragged their tribute to us, serving him all his days. That river was the mighty Euphrates, cutting through the heart of the ancient East. Our borders exploded north to the Euphrates and south to Egypt, swallowing our old Philistine enemies in the west. We were a massive empire now. God promised this exact soil to Abraham centuries ago in Genesis 15. Now, looking around, I realized we finally possessed every single inch of it. The kings next door didn't just bow. They hauled endless tribute, hiding behind the polite word of gifts. But make no mistake, these were forced taxes. Complete political surrender to our throne. 1 Kings 4 highlights the deafening peace that settled over our bloated, wealthy territory. He owned everything on our side of the river, from Tifsar all the way down to Gaza. Every single king in that region answered to him. Silence and peace wrapped around us on every border. Judah and Israel finally felt untouchable. Every man resting under his own vine and fig tree, from Dan down to Beersheba. It sounds completely beautiful, doesn't it? A poetic picture of absolute peace and overflowing prosperity. But you and I know comfort can become a psychological trap. It meant I could sit on my land without checking the horizon for raiding armies. From northern Dan down to southern Beersheba, we were completely locked in safety. But this quiet wasn't a miracle. It was bought with crushing military might. 1 Kings 4:26 tells us he kept 40,000 horse stalls and 12,000 riders. Hearing the stampede of 40,000 war horses shakes something deep in your soul. It was a brutal force, scaring away any rival king. And when weapons weren't enough, Solomon married into strategic alliances. Taking the Pharaoh's daughter as his wife in 1 Kings 3 was purely political business. Egypt was a monster, and this wedding locked down our southern border. But the king didn't just conquer with swords and rings. He invaded the mind and culture of the world. His terrifying wisdom pulled foreigners from every corner of the earth. Just wait until we uncover the Queen of Sheba's arrival. Our golden age bled into how the palace lived every single day. 1 Kings 4 lists the sickening amount of food they devoured. 30 cores of fine flour, 60 cores of meal, 10 grain-fed cattle, 20 from the pasture, and 100 sheep and goats. Every day. Throw in deer, gazelles, roebucks, and premium fowl. The sheer gluttony made my stomach turn. 30 cores of fine flour and 60 of regular meant 6 tons baked daily. 10 prime, grain-stuffed cattle. 20 grass-fed cows and 100 sheep, plus wild game. Meat was a rare luxury for us, but they ate it like water. All this feasting wasn't just for him and his wives. A massive swarm of officials, guards, and elite guests fed at his trough. 1 Kings 4:27 reveals that the regional governors brought these supplies for Solomon and his endless guests. They made sure the tables never emptied. Those 12 districts, our stolen tribal lands, kept the court stuffed all year. That endless food was a heavy symbol of our new power, but it felt hollow. The king's dark fame leaked far past our borders. 1 Kings chapter 4 says, God poured out wisdom, severe insight, and an understanding as endless as the sand on the shore. His mind eclipsed the greatest thinkers of the East and completely shamed all the ancient, towering wisdom of Egypt combined. He outsmarted everyone, even Ethan the Ezrahite. But what about us? They said his mind was terrifying. Wiser than Heman, Kalol, and Darda, Mahol's sons. His fame swallowed every border, eclipsing even the ancient wise men of the East. I felt so small. The Chaldeans, Arabs, and Egyptians, the world's greatest minds, bowed to him. Our king became the intellectual master of the entire known world. 1 Kings 4 records his relentless mind. I listened as he poured out 3,000 proverbs. His heavy songs numbered 1,005. He knew every living thing, from the towering Lebanon cedar to the fragile hyssop in the wall. He commanded knowledge of beasts, birds, reptiles, and fish. He wasn't just my king. He mastered reality itself, composing thousands of heavy proverbs and songs. You can still read them in Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs. His mind mapped everything, towering cedars, modest hyssop, and every animal, bird, reptile, and fish alive. This crushing political power, endless gold, and terrifying brilliance made him utterly alien to me. 1 Kings 4 verse 34 says they came from everywhere. Kings of the earth sent envoys, desperate to hear the wisdom of my ruler. Foreign royalty crowded our streets to witness his mind and behold our glory. Our golden age had begun, but I felt a strange, creeping loneliness. A season of wealth and total peace. International fame that would forever scar and shape the history of God's chosen people. You and I know what comes next. With the kingdom resting, Solomon decided to build the massive temple his father David always craved. The massive project demanded rare materials and our broken backs. 1 Kings 5 verse 1 notes, when Hiram, king of Tyre, heard Solomon was crowned, he sent his envoys immediately. Hiram had always loved David. This ancient alliance between the two kingdoms opened heavy, fateful doors for Solomon. 1 Kings 5, verses 2 to 6 records the message. Solomon wrote, You know the endless wars stopped my father David from building a temple for the name of his God until his enemies were crushed. But now my God has granted me perfect rest, no adversaries, no disaster anywhere. I am finally ready to build a temple for the name of my God, exactly as the Lord promised my father David, saying, "Your son, sitting on your throne, will build it. So command your men to cut the massive cedars of Lebanon for my vision. My own people will toil alongside yours. I will pay whatever wage you demand. We have no one as skilled at felling timber as your Sidonians." This was not just about wood. It was a pact. We Israelites would labor alongside men of Tyre, our sweat bought and paid for. Those Sidonians possessed an unnatural mastery over timber. 1 Kings 5, verses 7 to 9, shows Hiram was absolutely thrilled by this proposal. Hiram replied, "I have heard your message. I will give you everything you desire. The finest cedar and towering juniper logs are yours. My men will drag them from Lebanon to the Mediterranean Sea. We will float them as rafts to your chosen spot, break them apart, and you will carry them." The logistics were terrifyingly brilliant. Giant trees felled in the high mountains of Lebanon, dragged to the cold sea, lashed into massive rafts, and floated down the coast. Then we dragged them overland to Jerusalem. The terms were staggering. 1 Kings 5 verses 10 to 11 reveals, Hiram supplied every cedar and juniper log Solomon craved. In return, our king handed over 20,000 cores of wheat and 20 cores of pressed olive oil. Year after exhausting year, this tribute continued. We drained our food supplies to pay Tyre, a city starved of farmland. The empire grew rich, but I felt entirely consumed. 1 Kings 5 verse 12 says, "The Lord gave Solomon wisdom, exactly as promised." Hiram and Solomon forged a peaceful treaty to construct the Holy Temple. But to build this monument, the king desperately needed warm bodies. 1 Kings 5 verses 13 and 14 reveals my nightmare. Solomon drafted a massive labor force, 30,000 Israelite men. We were shipped to Lebanon in shifts of 10,000. 1 month there, 2 months home. Adoniram commanded the forced labor. It was an endless, rotating system. 30,000 of us, broken into groups of 10,000. 30 days hauling timber, then 60 days recovering back home in the dirt. They said it let us tend our families. But it wasn't enough. Solomon always craved more blood. 1 Kings 5 verses 15 to 16 says, 70,000 dragging burdens, 80,000 hacking stone in the mountains, and 3,300 cruel officers standing over us, supervising our every exhausting move. It erased my identity entirely. 30,000 timber workers, 70,000 laborers, 80,000 cutters and supervisors. Over 153,000 total workers. Stick with me here. Solomon obsessed over those foundation stones. 1 Kings 5 verse 17 says, "The king demanded massive, costly hewn blocks just to lay the temple's foundation." Verse 18 reveals how Solomon's builders, alongside Hiram's men, and the men of Gel worked the quarries, preparing endless timber and stone. Those Giblites from Gibel or Biblo possessed terrifying, unmatched construction mastery. This brutal preparation shows his absolute obsession. 1 Kings 6 verse 1 marks when our temple construction finally began. In the 480th year after we Israelites crawled out of Egypt's slavery, during the 4th year of King Solomon's heavy reign over us, in the spring month of Ziv, he finally started building the house of the Lord. The text frames this moment as a monumental historic milestone, linking our heavy labor directly to the Exodus. The temple's sacred dimensions were suffocatingly precise, 1 Kings 6 verses 2 to 3 notes, "The house Solomon built for God was 60 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. The grand vestibule in front stood 20 cubits across the temple's width, plunging 10 cubits deep from front to back. We measured every single cubit, about half a meter long. It stood 30 meters long, 10 meters wide, and 15 meters high. A massive looming shadow. An eerie detail surfaces in 1 Kings 6 verse 7. What do you and I make of this silence? The temple stones arrived completely finished. No hammer or iron chisel was ever heard on site. A terrifying, quiet monument of forced faith, echoing inside us even today. I watched the stones arrive, fitting together in dead silence. We dared not lift a hammer, terrified to disturb this sacred space. The sanctuary stood in 3 haunting sections. The ancient text of Kings records, 20 cubits of dark cedar sealed the back, from floor to ceiling. An oppressive inner room, the most holy place. My heart pounded standing near it. The outer sanctuary stretched 40 cubits long. A massive porch stood at the threshold. Beyond that 40-cubit holy place lay the terrifying 20-cubit void, waiting to swallow the Ark of the Covenant. They drowned the interior in suffocating wealth. 1 Kings chapter 6 tells us, Solomon overlaid the interior with pure gold. He stretched heavy golden chains across the inner sanctuary. I felt trapped behind that glittering metal. The entire temple was smothered in gold until no stone breathed. Even the altar near the inner sanctuary vanished beneath a cold, golden shell. Shadows danced on symbolic carvings. 1 Kings says, he carved all the walls, inside and out, with figures. I stared at them, feeling lost. Carved cherubim, palms and flowers. Cherubim meant God watched us. Palms whispered of victory, while flowers mocked our fleeting, fragile lives. Inside that terrifying darkness, Solomon placed 2 colossal cherubim. 1 Kings describes them. 10 cubits high, 16 feet of looming terror. They stood together, inner wings touching in the gloom, outer wings brushing the cold walls of my prison. 7 agonizing years passed. In 1 Kings chapter 6, we read, In the 11th year, in the month of Bul, the 8th month, the temple was finished in every detail. 7 years of our sweat. But after building God a house, Solomon turned to his own worldly palace. 1 Kings reveals a dark truth. Solomon took 13 years building his own house. 13 years. My faith wavered in his ambitious shadow. God got 7 years. The king took twice as long. You and I must ask, was it pride? They claimed it was just a massive complex of many buildings. First rose the house of the forest of Lebanon. 1 Kings chapter 7 describes how he built this massive, sprawling structure of Lebanese wood. 100 cubits long, 50 wide, 30 high. 4 endless rows of massive cedar pillars holding up heavy beams, feeling like a dead forest. 50 meters long. Walking through those tree-like pillars, I felt the cold crush of government power and hidden weapons. Then came the Hall of Pillars. 1 Kings says, he made a hall of pillars, 50 cubits by 30. It loomed right in front of us, vast and intimidating to a weary soul, with a porch and roof before them. Next, he raised the Hall of Judgment. 1 Kings says, he made a hall for the throne, to judge the people, paneled in cedar from floor to ceiling. Beside this court of fear lay his private residence. 1 Kings record, His own dwelling had an inner court of similar design. He even built a matching palace for his Egyptian wife, Pharaoh's daughter. Our sacred identity was slipping away. A separate palace for his Egyptian wife. We felt so compromised. Everything was built using the absolute highest quality materials. In chapter 7, the ancient text describes all these costly stones, cut to exact measurements, sawn perfectly inside and out, from the foundations up to the eaves, extending into the great courtyard. But beyond raising these massive alien buildings, Solomon demanded holy objects for the temple. 1 Kings chapter 7 introduces the stranger who forged them. The king brought Hiram all the way from Tyre, son of a widowed Israelite, but his father was a bronze worker from Tyre, a man caught between two worlds, just like me. Hiram possessed incredible wisdom, deep understanding, and secret knowledge of bronze. He stood before our king, taking on the massive burden of crafting everything required. Not the foreign king, but a master craftsman. His mother was one of us, his father a Tyrian, gifting him terrifyingly advanced ancient techniques that made me uneasy. He poured 2 monstrous bronze pillars for the temple threshold. 1 Kings details how each blinding column stood 18 cubits high, nearly 30 feet of solid terror, crowned with intricate pomegranates and lilies. He named them Jachin, God establishes, and Boaz, my strength. But I felt so weak. Out in the dusty courtyard, Hiram forged an impossible bronze sea. 1 Kings tells us, he cast a circular metal sea, 10 cubits across and 5 high, 30 cubits around. A massive deep basin where priests like me would desperately wash away our sins. Holding over 11,000 gallons, it crushed the backs of 12 bronze oxen. Those silent beasts represented our 12 tribes, bearing an unbearable spiritual weight. Beyond that vast sea, he forged 10 movable basins. 1 Kings provides a dizzying description of their complex bases carved with lions, oxen, and cherubim. Hiram kept pouring bronze, churning out endless ritual tools. Hiram made basins, shovels, and bowls. We produced so much bronze under the scorching sun that Solomon finally gave up weighing the staggering piles of metal. The text says, Solomon left all the articles unweighed because they multiplied endlessly. The true weight of the bronze was entirely unknown. Inside, Solomon replaced bronze with blinding gold. 1 Kings says, Solomon made all the golden furnishings for the house of the Lord. The golden altar, the golden table for the bread of the presence, 10 pure gold lampstands flanking the terrifying inner sanctuary, flickering over golden flowers, golden lamps, tongs, cups, and bowls. Every censer cast in pure heavy gold. The golden altar choked the air with thick, sweet incense. The table carried 12 loaves, representing our scattered tribes. Instead of one humble lampstand from our wilderness days, Solomon's 10 lamps cast overwhelming shadows everywhere. When the noise finally stopped, Solomon brought in the ancient offerings his father David had dedicated. 1 Kings records, all the work King Solomon did for the Lord was finished. He brought in the sacred things his father David had left behind. The silver, the gold. Now you and I stand here in the dust. The temple is ready, waiting to swallow the ark. Will God truly live among us? I stand in Jerusalem, trembling. King Solomon has summoned us, the elders, the broken, the seekers, just as 1 Kings 8 verse 12 describes. Our tribal chiefs step forward to bring up the ark of the Lord's covenant from Zion. We Israelites watch, carrying the heavy baggage of our own lost identities. We gather around Solomon during the festival in Ethanim, the 7th month. It is the Feast of Tabernacles. So many of us pilgrims wander here, desperate to find an anchor. The priests carry the ark, fulfilling 1 Kings 8:34. As our weary elders arrive, the air feels heavy with silent dread. They lift the ark, the tent of meeting, and every sacred item. My anxious heart races as they carry our fragile history. In 1 Kings 8, verses 6 through 9, we watch the ark finally settle into its quiet resting place. The priests carry the covenant into the inner sanctuary, the most holy place. They set it down beneath the massive wings of the cherubim. I feel so small, so unworthy. Those golden wings spread out, casting a deep shadow over the ark and its poles. A divine darkness hiding my sins. Right then, something terrifying and beautiful happens. 1 Kings 8, verses 10 and 11 tell us that as the priests step back, a massive cloud fills the temple. The priests cannot even stand to work. The sheer, overwhelming glory of the Lord consumes the room, and my own darkness shrinks back. This cloud is God, physically here, choosing to live among us flawed humans. As that blinding glory sweeps over my face, I realize I am no longer alone. Solomon turns to us in 1 Kings 8, verses 14 through 21. He openly admits this massive temple was entirely God's grand design. He cries out, praising the God of Israel for keeping his ancient promises to David. Listening to his words, I feel a sudden spark of hope. Then Solomon begins a staggering prayer. 1 Kings 8, verses 22 and 23 say, Solomon stood before the altar. He faced us, the entire trembling assembly of Israel, raising his hands to the sky. He shouts, Lord, God of Israel, nothing in heaven or on earth compares to your pure light. I feel my inner walls shattering. You keep your loving promises to those who follow you. My heart aches. Have I truly followed? Then Solomon exposes his deep wonder in 1 Kings 8, verse 27. But will God truly live on earth? Even the highest heavens cannot hold you. How could this cold stone temple I built ever be enough to house you? He begs the Creator to hear our desperate voices. In 1 Kings 8, verses 28 and 29, he pleads, Yet hear your servant's prayer. Listen to this cry for mercy. Lord, my God, hear the broken, anguished prayers I bring before you today. Let your eyes watch over this building day and night, this sacred place where you promised, my name will live there. Hear us when we turn our weary faces toward this house. As I listen, hot tears fill my eyes. Solomon lists every nightmare we fear: bitter conflicts, starvation, brutal wars, and the crushing isolation of captivity. In every tragedy, he begs heaven to hear us when we pray. The ceremony ends with a staggering flood of sacrifices. 1 Kings 8, verses 62 and 63 records, The king and all of us offered blood before the Lord. Solomon surrendered 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep to find peace. We celebrate for 14 days, 7 for the dedication, 7 more for tabernacles. Then in 1 Kings 8, verse 66, a massive shift happens within us. I walk home, joyful and completely changed. My heart feels light, grateful for everything God did for David and for us. Shortly after that profound spiritual shift, God speaks directly to Solomon. In 1 Kings 9, verses 3 through 5, God answers, I have heard your desperate plea. I have made this temple completely holy, placing my name there forever. But God drops a chilling warning in 1 Kings 9, verses 6 through 9. If we lose our faith and blindly turn away, we will face bitter exile, and this sanctuary will fall. Meanwhile, Solomon's wisdom echoes across the earth. 1 Kings 10 verse 1 tells us, "The Queen of Sheba heard of his fame and his deep bond with God. She came seeking answers to her own agonizing, unanswerable questions. She traveled from what is now Yemen or Ethiopia. You and I know that kind of brutal, lonely journey, driven by a desperate need for absolute truth." 1 Kings 10 verse 2 describes her arriving in Jerusalem with a massive caravan, camels loaded with spices, heavy gold, and jewels. I watched her pour out every dark fear weighing on her mind. She tested him with her deepest spiritual struggles, and he did not fail her. In 1 Kings 10 verses 3 through 5 says, "He answered every single riddle. Nothing was too profound or hidden to explain." As she absorbed his deep wisdom and saw the stunning palace, the rich food on his table, his seated officials, the robed servants, the cupbearers, and the quiet devotion of his burnt offerings at the temple, her defenses crumbled. She was utterly breathless, stripped of all her royal pride by what she witnessed. In 1 Kings 10 verses 6 and 7, she finally admits, "The rumors I heard back home about your achievements and your insight are actually true. I refused to believe it until I stood here, seeing it myself. They didn't even tell me half of it. Your wisdom shatters everything I thought I knew." Standing beside me, she finally recognized the true divine source. In 1 Kings 10 verse 9, she cries out, "Praise the Lord your God. He delights in you and placed you on this throne. Because of God's eternal love for our broken people, He made you king to bring us justice." Overcome with relief, she handed over staggering wealth. 1 Kings 10 verse 10 says, "She gave him 120 talents of gold, endless spices, and jewels. We had never seen such a breathtaking flood of fragrance and wealth in our lives." Solomon matched her generosity completely. 1 Kings 10 verse 13 beautifully reveals, "King Solomon gave the queen everything her searching heart asked for, alongside his massive royal bounty." Her inner exile ended. She packed her retinue and returned to her own country. Her visit proved that deep spiritual truth attracts the most isolated, lonely souls. As you and I read the final verses of 1 Kings chapter 10, we uncover the sheer scale of his earthly wealth. Verse 14 tells me the gold Solomon pulled in every single year weighed 66 talents. This mind-bending fortune flowed from global trade, forced foreign tributes, and massive ocean expeditions. 1 Kings 10 verses 22 and 23 say the king commanded a massive fleet alongside Hiram's ships. Every 3 years they returned, bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and baboons. Solomon's wealth was unmatched. But this ancient map is a mirror. Are you and I ready to end our exile? Have you ever felt success become a cage? I used my wealth to forge pure luxury. The ancient texts record I made 200 heavy shields of hammered gold. 600 shekels of gold went into every single shield. I also crafted 300 smaller shields, pouring 3 minas of gleaming gold into each one of them. I hung them in the palace of the forest of Lebanon. My royal throne was an absolute masterpiece. The scriptures say I built a massive throne, covered in white ivory and overlaid with pure, refined gold. It stood elevated upon 6 steps, and its high back featured a perfectly rounded top. Beside both armrests stood fierce golden lions guarding my seat. 12 more lions lined the 6 steps, positioned carefully at either end of every single level. No other kingdom on earth had ever seen anything like it. My vast wealth haunted even the simplest objects. As the 10th chapter of 1 Kings notes, all my royal goblets were solid gold. Every single household item within the palace of the forest of Lebanon was crafted from the purest gold. Nothing was made of silver. Silver meant absolutely nothing to me in those days. My horses and war chariots were just as overwhelmingly impressive. The records state I hoarded chariots and horses. I possessed 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horses, keeping them stationed in chariot cities and close to me in Jerusalem. Silver and cedar wood, once deeply precious, became so agonizingly common during my reign that they felt as worthless as scattered stones. My horses were shipped in from Egypt and beyond, building a massive trade network that only pushed my kingdom deeper into overwhelming luxury. This was the absolute peak of our material prosperity. Never before or after would my people drown in such extreme wealth, military power, and global prestige. I had transformed our small nation into a feared, dominant empire of the ancient world. But under that glittering gold and the dark shadow of cedar, walking through Jerusalem's palaces, my own heart was fracturing. I was losing myself. I, the man who once begged God for wisdom, began collecting women like shining jewels or thoroughbred horses. I took hundreds, suffocating the halls with exotic perfumes, strange new languages, and far more dangerously, foreign gods. In the opening lines of 1 Kings chapter 11, my darkest failure is laid bare. It says I loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter, Moabites, Ammonites, Sidonians, and Hittites. These were the very nations God explicitly warned us about, saying, "You must not marry them, for they will absolutely drag your hearts toward their false gods." Yet I clung to them in desperate love. The Almighty had clearly forbidden these marriages, not out of some obsession with racial bloodlines, but because He knew they would drag their hollow idols right into the spiritual core of our people. I completely ignored that warning. My household grew staggering. The text reveals I took 700 royal wives and 300 concubines. And just as warned, they shattered my spiritual compass. 1,000 women, each one a powerful princess or noble from some distant shore. Why did I do it? To survive the ruthless politics of my era. Every single wedding forged a political alliance. The Pharaoh's daughter anchored a treaty with a massive Egyptian empire. The others tied me to Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and the Hittite lands. I was just signing peace treaties in the form of vows. In the beginning, let's be honest, you and I both know the trap of compromise. I actually thought I could keep my faith while stockpiling power. After all, I built the Holy Temple. I saw God's blinding glory fill it. But the human soul is fragile. Inch by inch, my absolute devotion began to erode into nothingness. These weren't just cold, hollow political stunts. The ancient scrolls tell the truth. I genuinely loved these women. And love makes you want to keep them happy. So, to keep the peace, I started making small, lethal compromises. How could I say no to a weeping princess missing her childhood deities? It felt harmless to let a queen build a tiny hidden altar in the royal gardens just to pray. Step by agonizing step, little by little, I, the man renowned for divine wisdom, drifted far away from the very Creator who had gifted me everything. When history says my wives turned my heart away, understand this wasn't just an outward shift in ritual. It was a terrifying collapse at the absolute core of my identity. The brilliant intellect that made my name famous globally could not protect me from my own pathetic need to please the people I loved, even if it meant stabbing the God who had placed the crown on my head. Years later, writing the book of Ecclesiastes, an old and broken man, I penned the toxic reflections of someone who learned the truth entirely too late. I found a snare far more bitter than the grave. The temptation whose heart is a trap, whose hands are heavy iron chains. Whoever pleases the Lord escapes, but the wandering soul is locked in her grip. My wives were not demons. They were just people, faithfully clinging to the ancient traditions of their homelands. The crushing guilt belongs entirely to me. I knew the truth. I had the divine law etched in my mind, but I traded it away for diplomacy and affection. And the sickness didn't stop at marriage. Soon those tiny, polite concessions mutated into full-blown spiritual treason. 1 Kings chapter 11 outlines my pathetic downward spiral. It says that when I grew old, my heart surrendered to other gods. I was no longer wholly devoted to the Lord, completely failing to walk the loyal path of my father David. That comparison to my father burns. David committed horrific acts, adultery, pure murder, but he never abandoned the Almighty for hollow statues. Despite his massive moral failures, his soul remained stubbornly anchored in his loyalty to heaven. Yet I, who started out so impeccably righteous, ended up committing the one betrayal he never did. I fractured my worship. It didn't happen in a day. It was a slow fade. First tolerating the rituals, then silently watching. Finally, I was bowing down in the dirt to foreign deities. The scriptures expose it brutally. They record that I followed Ashtoreth, the Sidonian goddess of fertility and flesh, and Milcom, the vile idol of the Ammonites. Ashtoreth demanded sensual rituals from her Phoenician followers. Her worship dragged my people into temple prostitution and debauchery. And Milcom, the dark god Molech, he demanded the horrific sacrifice of human children in the fire. These weren't harmless myths. Are you letting the same silent idols consume you? I watched my people embrace rituals the God of Israel called pure abominations. You and I must confront this darkness unfolding in verse 7. I stood paralyzed as our King Solomon built a towering altar for Chemosh, Moab's nightmare, right on the eastern hill, and for Molech, Ammon's horrific idol, directly overlooking my home. Chemosh demanded human blood. I felt betrayed. Solomon didn't just quietly tolerate this ancient pagan madness in our streets. He spent our gold to build their shrines. The location crushed my spirit. He built them on the Mount of Olives, staring right at our sacred temple. The audacity filled me with dread. It meant if I looked out from the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant rested safely beneath the golden wings of the brain, cherubim, my eyes would meet pagan altars raised by our own king. Solomon's spiritual betrayal wasn't hidden in shadows. It was violently public. He mocked the very sanctuary we built. I heard his silent taunt. Yes, I gave the Lord a house, but I will crown this city with temples for other gods. Verse 8 reveals my heartbreak. He did this for every foreign wife, filling the air with the suffocating smoke of their incense and pagan sacrifices. I watched my sacred identity dissolve. Solomon wasn't just tolerating foreigners. He was actively financing biblical idolatry, building pagan sites for his countless wives. I felt the divine wrath gathering like a storm. Verse 9 warns, "So the Lord became furious with Solomon, because his heart abandoned the God of Israel." God had shown himself to him twice, a profound, intimate grace. Yet I watched our king turn his back on the very Creator who had crowned him with such glory. You and I understand this temptation. He didn't just break a rule, he shattered our first, most fundamental vow. Have no other gods before me. I felt the very bedrock of our covenant crumbling beneath my feet, destroyed by the very man trusted to fiercely guard it. The language in verse 10 haunts me. The Lord specifically commanded him to reject these dark entities, but he completely failed to protect the charge God had given him. The Hebrew word for keep is what God told Adam in Eden. And just as Adam failed to protect paradise from the serpent, I knew we were doomed. Solomon failed to defend my soul against this spiritual rot. Like Adam losing paradise, I realized our king was about to lose everything. The golden peace I grew up with was unraveling. The shadows were closing in. 1 Kings chapter 11 verse 14 confirms my deepest fears. Then the Lord raised up a nightmare against Solomon, Hadad the Edomite, of royal blood. Hadad wasn't some new threat conjured out of nowhere to punish our rebellion. He was a ghost from our violent past, carrying decades of bleeding hatred. When David crushed Edom years ago, his commander Joab showed absolutely no mercy. Verse 15 reveals our dark legacy. When Joab marched up to bury the dead, he relentlessly slaughtered every single male left in Edom. Little Hadad was just a terrified boy who fled to Egypt with his servants. Pharaoh embraced him, giving him a massive estate, fertile land, and a bride from Egyptian royalty. Hadad lived in luxury for years, but I know that kind of trauma. He never forgot our brutal slaughter. Hearing that David and Joab were dead, he finally saw his opening. In verse 21, he begs Pharaoh, "Let me leave. I must return to my own country." Ignoring Pharaoh's warnings, Hadad marched back into Edom. Suddenly, our southern borders were bleeding, and the peace I once trusted felt like a total lie. But Hadad wasn't our only demon. Verse 23 reveals another divine punishment rising against us. Rezon, son of Eliada, a fugitive from the fallen king of Zobah. His story terrified me just as much. He was a ruthless commander from another kingdom David had utterly crushed. When his king fell, Rezon vanished into the wilderness, transforming into a savage outlaw. He slowly amassed an army of broken men in the shadows. While David was busy slaughtering Zobah's forces, these rebels claimed Damascus. I watched from afar as Rezon built his own aggressive kingdom just north of us. He became our relentless curse during Solomon's life, echoing Hadad's southern terror. Rezon ruled Aram, breathing nothing but pure hatred for my people. Hadad tearing us apart in the south, Rezon crushing us from the north. I felt profoundly trapped. The tranquil era of trade and towering monuments was rapidly suffocating me. But my greatest fear was born inside our own walls. Verse 26 says, Jeroboam, son of Nebat, an Ephraimite from Zeradah, Solomon's own servant, raised by a widowed mother named Zeruiah, violently rebelled against the crown. Jeroboam wasn't some distant warlord. He was one of us, an Ephraimite. I knew him. He was a highly trusted leader inside Solomon's own inner circle. Verse 28 explains, Jeroboam was fiercely driven. Seeing this young man's brilliance, Solomon gave him total control over the crushing labor camps of the house of Joseph. Those were my northern brothers, Ephraim and Manasseh. I watched Jeroboam drive them like cattle to fuel Solomon's massive, never-ending vanity projects. Yet all that royal privilege couldn't stop him from stabbing his master. Why did he turn? I searched his eyes for answers. Verse 27 gives a dark clue to how this civil nightmare actually began. Solomon built the Millo, sealing up the broken walls of his father David's city. It was a massive, back-breaking military defense project. Why did fixing a wall enrage him? Because I saw it firsthand. Solomon treated us northerners like slaves, breaking our backs to protect his glittering capital. That bitter venom between Judah and the rest of us had festered since David's era. Solomon's brutal taxes and forced labor poured salt in those old wounds. But I felt an even deeper, supernatural current driving this chaos. Jeroboam didn't even understand it himself. God was tearing our world apart. These enemies weren't just politicians, they were divine judgment walking among us. They were hammers of divine wrath striking a king who abandoned his soul. Then, one quiet morning, I watched Jeroboam leave Jerusalem, heading north to his roots. The sun blazed off those perfect stone walls, mocking the heavy despair inside my chest. He walked alone in a new cloak, plotting rebellion or dreading tomorrow. Stick with me. His lonely march into exile mirrors our own spiritual journeys. Have you ever felt a terrifying destiny stalking you? I froze. A shadow blocked the path. Ahijah the prophet buried in his heavy cloak. We stood completely alone in the barren wilderness. The ancient text of 1 Kings 11:29 records my exact steps. I was leaving Jerusalem when the prophet intercepted me. Ahijah wore a spotless, freshly woven garment. There was nobody else out there in the empty fields. What he did next shattered my reality. Verse 30 describes the absolute madness. Ahijah grabbed his flawless new cloak and violently ripped it into 12 jagged pieces. No warning, no explanation. He destroyed his precious garment, tearing it into 12 equal strips. Then he locked eyes with me. "Take 10 pieces," he whispered, "for the Lord declares this. Look, I am ripping the entire kingdom from Solomon's bleeding hands, and I am giving 10 tribes to you." The prophecy struck like physical violence. The great, united Israel would be shredded, exactly like that ruined fabric. 10 of the 12 ancient tribes were now being handed over to me. Me, a nobody with 0 royal blood, no legal right to any throne. Yet heaven wasn't totally abandoning David's line. In verse 32, Ahijah pressed on. He retains 1 tribe for the sake of my servant David, and for Jerusalem, the one city I selected out of all the tribes to carry my name. Judah, absorbing the tiny remnant of Benjamin, would stay stubbornly loyal to David's decaying royal bloodline. Why was God pouring such terrifying judgment onto Solomon's perfect golden empire? Ahijah made it chillingly clear in verse 33. Because they abandoned me, they bowed down to Ashtoreth, the Sidonian idol, and to Chemosh, the sickening god of the Moabites, and Milcom, the twisted god of Ammon. They stopped walking my paths. They abandoned what is right, completely failing his father David's legacy. It wasn't merely Solomon rotting from within. The whole nation let his toxic example drag them into deep spiritual darkness. The betrayal hatched in the high palace infected every corner of our land. Yet strangely, mercy lingered. God wouldn't rip the crown away while Solomon still breathed. "I will not strip the entire kingdom from his grip," the prophet relayed. "I will leave him power until his death, simply to honor my chosen servant David." David's fading ghost, not Solomon's corrupted wisdom, kept the fragile dynasty alive. The divine promise held fast against the rising chaos. For now, even though the son had completely lost his true identity. As for me, the prophet handed down a heavy, conditional vow. "I am taking you," Ahijah said. "You will rule everything your starving heart craves, sitting as king. But this demands everything. If you heed all my commands, walk my paths, and actually do what is right before my eyes, fiercely guarding my ancient rules and laws exactly like David did, only then will I stand by you, building you an unbreakable house like David's, and hand you Israel." This was my terrifying chance to forge a permanent dynasty. But it hung on one brutal thread: absolute loyalty to the divine. The exact spiritual weight that crushed David's family was now resting on my shoulders. After hearing those impossible words, I staggered home. My mind was spinning, agonizing over the terrifying pressure of this destiny. When do I move? How do I claim it? But somehow, whispers of this secret prophecy bled into Solomon's paranoid court. Verse 40 tells my darkest hour. Solomon ordered my assassination. Paralyzed by fear, I ran. I fled into Egypt, hiding in exile until Solomon finally died. It felt like a bitter joke. I was fleeing back into Egypt, the ancient house of our slavery. The very land that once crushed us was now my only sanctuary from Israel's own madness. And Shishak, the ruthless Pharaoh hiding me in the shadows, would soon become God's weapon, invading Judah to punish Solomon's heir. From my distant exile, I watched the blinding gold of Solomon's utopia turn to cheap rust. The man who once held divine wisdom in his palms was drowning in the poison of his own massive ego. Endless gold still choked his vaults. Sweet spices masked the stench of his palace, but the sacred presence was gone. 1 Kings 11 starts closing the tyrant's chapter. It reads, "As for the rest of Solomon's acts, his achievements, his supposed wisdom, are they not recorded in the lost annals of Solomon? That forgotten ancient scroll holds ghosts we will never know." The scriptures leave out the noise, only keeping the deep psychological scars. The raw moments tracing God's strange, heavy hand over us. Verse 42 coldly sums up his time, stating the days he ruled Jerusalem over all Israel lasted exactly 40 years. 40 is a haunting number. It means a brutal test. Moses vanished on the mountain for 40 days. Our ancestors bled for 40 years in the desert sand. David reigned 40 years. Now Solomon finished his 40-year trial. Like his father David, Solomon possessed enough time to burn his massive legacy deep into our nation's identity. But David, despite his horrific moral failures, died unbroken with God. Solomon withered away in a cold, spiritual wasteland. The holy text is painfully blunt, refusing to celebrate his final, failing breath. Verse 43 simply mutters, "Then Solomon slept with his ancestors. They buried him in David's ancient city, and Rehoboam took the heavy crown." No mention of his failing body or his fractured mental state. I still wonder if he ever broke down and repented in the dark before slipping away. No grand farewell speech, no profound blessing for his confused son. Just dead silence. That terrifying quiet is the perfect eulogy for a man who lost himself completely. The icon who started with massive potential, holding more supernatural insight than anyone, the architect of God's majestic earthly house. He simply vanished without fixing his own fractured soul. Looking back, some think his later writings reflect the agonizing moment he realized. Every earthly obsession was completely hollow. Maybe he finally returned to fearing the divine as the only thing that matters. If that is true, perhaps the fallen king found a sliver of peace before hitting the grave. But even if he wept in secret, the cultural cancer he unleashed couldn't be stopped. The kingdom was fracturing. False gods possessed the land. Enemies waited at the edges. And his weak son Rehoboam was completely blind to the coming apocalyptic storm. His era was buried. But staring at the ruins, I must ask, are you and I repeating his tragic mistakes today? I remember the dazzling fame wrapped up in one ruler. But everything after became just a pale ghost of ancient Israel's former glory, long before Solomon fell. He handed his son a kingdom shining on the surface, but rotting in our souls. Those massive monuments and lavish palaces cost us deeply. Crushing taxes, back-breaking forced labor. His faith in the ancient law dissolved into political deals and dark, selfish cravings. His example of religious compromise threw the doors wide open to terrifying idolatry. Now, his son Rehoboam was about to make us face those dark consequences. Step into the dust with me. We quickly saw he lacked the wisdom to navigate our breaking nation. With Solomon finally in the tomb, his boy Rehoboam prepared to seize the throne. He desperately needed to lock down the loyalty of our fractured tribes. The ancient record of First Kings tells us, Rehoboam traveled to Shechem, for all Israel had gathered there to crown him. I find it vital we dragged him to our northern soil, far from comfortable Jerusalem. Shechem sits deep in northern Ephraim's territory. It is sacred, haunted ground, where Joshua once renewed our ancestors' fragile covenant with God. By demanding the royal coronation happen right there, Rehoboam finally seemed to acknowledge us northern tribes. Our loyalty was hanging by a delicate thread, far less certain than his own comfortable tribe. Then came Jeroboam. He had fled to Egypt to escape Solomon's wrath, but heard the king died and hurried back to our side. Verses 2 and 3 tell us, when Jeroboam, son of Nebat, heard this, he was still hiding in Egypt from King Solomon. He came back, so we desperately sent for him to lead us. He and our entire assembly went to Rehoboam. We stood together in the dust. Northern leaders with Jeroboam speaking for our deep pain, bringing the new king a desperate plea. Your father crushed us with a heavy yoke. Just lighten our harsh labor. Lift this unbearable weight off our bruised backs, and we will gladly serve you. We weren't declaring war. It wasn't open rebellion, just a plea for survival. We were truly ready to accept Rehoboam as our rightful king, but we needed breathing room. Just a break from the crushing taxes and forced labor Solomon used to buy his massive palaces and golden, extravagant life. The new king asked for 3 days to weigh our lives. That felt completely fair to me. In verse 5, he commanded us to leave and return later. We anxiously waited. Inside, he gathered 2 very different circles of advisors. First, he asked the gray-haired elders from his father's court. Verse 7 reveals their gentle warning. If today you become a servant to these broken people and give them a gentle answer, they will be yours forever. I wish he embraced that deep wisdom. Those old men knew real leadership requires sacrifice. If Rehoboam just proved he cared about our desperate survival and humanity, especially us forgotten northerners fading in the shadows, he would have owned our hearts. But Rehoboam despised their words. My guess? It bruised his ego, made him feel dangerously weak. Verse 8 shatters everything. But Rehoboam rejected the elders' counsel and turned instead to the arrogant young men he grew up with, the ones now feeding his pride. These entitled boys, raised in golden palaces, fed him absolute poison. In verses 10 and 11, you can hear them pushing him to break our spirits completely. Tell the peasants who cried out to lighten the heavy yoke. Tell them this: my little finger is thicker than my dead father's entire waist. My father laid a heavy yoke on your tired necks. I will make it agonizing. He whipped you. I will tear your flesh open with venomous scorpions. Those boys played his deep insecurity. They convinced him he had to become a terrifying tyrant just to step out of his father's massive shadow. They believed true power was just fear and raw violence, not love or holy covenant. And my heart sank when Rehoboam swallowed the poison of those cruel friends. I walked back into the assembly 3 days later. He stared down at us and unleashed pure venom. Right there in verse 14, he embraced the arrogance of his friends, declaring, "My father made your yoke heavy. I will make it unbearable. My father whipped you. I will flay you with scorpions." The absolute arrogance. He erased our hunger and humanity entirely. Instead of healing the deep wounds his famous father carved into us, offering a single shred of mercy, he promised an absolute nightmare. He wanted us paralyzed by terror. He didn't understand the human soul. You can only terrorize a starving crowd until they decide they would rather die than live in his chains anymore. Look at verse 15 with me. There was a spiritual current beneath our panic. So the king did not listen to the people, for this turn of events was from the Lord, fulfilling the prophecy spoken to Jeroboam. Standing there terrified, I couldn't see his blind arrogance was actually part of a hidden divine map. The Almighty stepped back, letting the king hang himself on his own pride to tear our nation apart. The young ruler chose this cruelty freely, driven by his dark ego. Yet God wove that bitter sin into a heavier, mysterious purpose. For me, hearing those threats was the final snap of the rope. My brothers and I, broken by years of slavery and empty pockets, completely snapped. In 1 Kings chapter 12, our furious roar echoes off the ancient page. When we realized this tyrant was totally deaf to us, we screamed back, "What share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, O Israel! Look after your own house, David." And we turned our backs and walked away. My chest pounded. The unified kingdom was dead. What share in David? It was us cutting the cord forever. We were rejecting the great Davidic dynasty, shouting into the wind that we owed absolutely nothing to this spoiled, vicious royal heir. To your tents used to be a harmless, ancient dismissal, but screaming it that day felt like taking a terrifying plunge into the absolute dark. We were walking away from Jerusalem, shattering our shared identity forever. Telling David to look after his own house meant his golden boy could rule his own tiny patch of dirt. Never our whole nation again. Verse 17 shows exactly how fast it all unraveled. Anyone living south inside Judah's borders was stuck under Rehoboam's heavy thumb. Only Judah, the tiny tribe of Benjamin, and a handful of loyal Levites clung to the rotting ghost of David's house. The rest of us, 10 entire tribes, erased him from our hearts. But a tyrant never just lets his property walk away. What do you think happens when you cage desperate men? Verse 18. Rehoboam sent Adoniram, our chief slave driver, to crush us. We picked up rocks and we ended his life. You and I know what it feels like to break. Adoniram came to collect our taxes. He was the living, breathing face of everything crushing my people. Sending him to quiet us was Rehoboam's blindest mistake. The eruption was inevitable. I watched the crowd stone Adoram until he stopped moving. The blood on our hands made Rehoboam finally wake up to the nightmare. This was no polite disagreement anymore. My nation was tearing itself apart in open rebellion. Feeling the panic, Rehoboam bolted. Scripture tells us the king somehow scrambled into his royal chariot and fled for his life toward Jerusalem. He raced to the safety of his fortress in Judah, hiding behind Jerusalem's walls. The fracture between my northern brothers and the south was absolute. The ancient text seals our fate. Israel remains in exile from the house of David, even now. When these painful words were written down, my people were still a broken, divided family. Truthfully, that deep spiritual wound never closed. My home in the north and Judah down south, we stayed shattered, isolated kingdoms until foreign armies consumed us both. With Rehoboam gone, we scrambled in the dark to build our own throne. The scroll says, when we heard Jeroboam was back, we summoned him and crowned him king over the north. Only Judah clung to the fading ghost of David's royal line. Jeroboam, who was promised 10 tribes by a prophet, watched that ancient whisper become reality. We chose him, severing our identity from David forever. We were entirely on our own. But Rehoboam refused to let us go. The texts reveal him gathering his strength, hungry for brother to slaughter brother. Reaching Jerusalem, he mobilized Judah and Benjamin, 180,000 young soldiers, a massive machine of death built to drag us back under the yoke of Solomon's son. 180,000 men, a suffocating force. He fully intended to drown our new freedom in blood and force us back into his grip. It would have been an absolute massacre between brothers. I felt the shadow of death approaching. But the divine stepped in. The record states the word came to Shemaiah, the man of God, commanding him to speak to Rehoboam, the king of Judah, to Benjamin, and to all the lingering crowds. Tell them exactly what the Creator demands. Do not march against your own blood. Go back to your houses, every single one of you, because this fracture comes from me. Through that prophet, the heavens halted our self-destruction. The terrifying truth was confirmed. My fractured identity, our torn nation, was the heavy price paid for Solomon losing his way. To wage war on us was to fight the divine itself. Shockingly, the arrogant king actually listened. The scripture finishes, they surrendered to the holy command and retreated, just as instructed. For a frightened ruler who had ignored the old elders days earlier, laying down his weapons was a rare moment of sanity. But as the dust settled, we watched our new king Jeroboam stare into a terrifying abyss of spiritual anxiety. Jerusalem, the heartbeat of my soul since David's era, now sat deep behind enemy lines. The sacred temple, our sanctuary for holy gatherings, belonged to Rehoboam. I felt the same creeping dread the king felt in 1 Kings 12. Jeroboam's paranoia whispered in the dark, this fragile nation will inevitably crawl back to David's house. If my people keep journeying down to Jerusalem's temple to offer their sacrifices, their hearts will eventually soften and return. They will slaughter me in the streets and bow to Rehoboam again. His terror was entirely justified. It was my terror too. If you and I keep walking those dusty roads to Jerusalem for the holy feasts, our allegiance will inevitably drift south. Worshipping in that ancient city would slowly pull our souls back to Judah, melting us back into David's empire. So, Jeroboam engineered a desperate psychological cure, a shiny new religion. The text exposes his fatal choice. Seeking quiet counsel, the desperate king forged 2 massive calves out of pure gold. He told us, "The trek to Jerusalem is simply too exhausting for you. Look, Israel, here are the divine beings who pulled you from Egypt." He offered us glittering idols, twisting the truth, claiming these lifeless statues were the very power that rescued our ancestors. I felt a cold shiver. We were plunging right back into our deepest historical trauma, just like when Aaron molded the metal and declared, "These are your gods, Israel, who dragged you out of slavery." A haunting echo of Exodus. Then he anchored us to 2 fake sanctuaries. The ancient scroll reads, one he placed in Bethel and the other far away in Dan. He mapped our psychology perfectly. Bethel sat right on our southern edge, blocking the path to Judah. Dan guarded the distant north. He boxed us in with convenience, offering easy salvation so my people would forget the agonizing climb to Zion. But this was never about shortening my commute. It was a calculated spiritual betrayal, tearing us away from the one sacred ground the Creator had chosen for us. Deuteronomy 12:14 leaves no room for doubt. This compromise mutated into pure poison. We abandoned ourselves, wandering all the way to Dan just to bow to metal. He didn't stop there. He threw out the sacred Levites and invented a cheap, counterfeit priesthood. I watched him twist the law. The scroll notes. He erected hilltop shrines, handing the holy duties to anyone willing to play along. To fully erase our past, he even dared to rewrite the rhythm of time, shifting our sacred dates. The text exposes his final manipulation. He launched a massive festival on the 15th day of the 8th month, a hollow copy of the holy gathering down in Judah. I watched him burn offerings on that false altar in Bethel, feeding smoke to his golden beasts. He paraded his fake priests right before my eyes. The Feast of Tabernacles, the sacred memory Moses commanded us to honor in the 7th month, was dragged into the 8th month up here in the north. This wasn't holy revelation. It was a delusion, forged entirely in the dark corners of Jeroboam's mind. Every twisted ritual was designed to sever my soul from the Jerusalem temple. He traded my spiritual identity just to secure his grip on the throne. But from heaven's perspective, this was a systemic, unforgivable rebellion. Through all the ancient record, this tragic moment became the ultimate benchmark for betrayal. Every ruler after him was judged by this single, sickening standard. The chapter leaves us with a chilling picture. Jeroboam standing proud, playing priest at his own counterfeit altar. He burned his offerings in Bethel on that fake 15th day of the 8th month, a season he pulled out of thin air. He built us a fake festival stepping to the altar. You and I must ask, when we feel lost, what golden calves do we invent? I watched the king build these cheap altars. It's a religion of pure convenience, a desperate substitute for the terrifying truth of God. Our rebellion wasn't a slow mistake. It was engineered by our own king. You and I know how easily convenience replaces faith, don't we? I am standing in the terrified crowd in 1 Kings 13 when a nameless prophet from Judah steps up to the counterfeit altar. The prophet screams that a future king named Josiah will shatter this sacred place. I see Jeroboam point his finger, barking orders to seize him. Instantly, his arm withers into dead flesh. The heavy stone altar violently cracks in half, spilling out hot ashes. The prophet prays, miraculously healing the king's arm. Yet even that doesn't shatter his pride. he clings to fake power. 1 Kings 13 reads, "Even after this, Jeroboam refused to turn back. He simply kept grabbing everyday men from the streets, appointing them as priests for high places. Anyone who wanted the title was quickly ordained." Verse 34 brings a chilling final verdict down on all our desperate choices. This pure arrogance sealed his family's doom, erasing them from the earth. His desperate rules didn't just drag my people into deep spiritual darkness. They doomed his bloodline. In 1 Kings 14, the prophet Ahijah is sent to declare a crushing judgment against Jeroboam's entire house. When the prince falls sick, the terrified king sends his wife in disguise to secretly consult the prophet. But old blind Ahijah sees right through her disguise. He delivers a brutal message. Jeroboam's entire family line will be utterly slaughtered, and my people will eventually face long exile for our deep corruption. As for the dying boy, Ahijah prophesied, all Israel will weep for him and bury him. He is the only one of Jeroboam's blood getting a quiet grave, because heaven found a flicker of goodness in his heart. Even inside this crushing horror, I feel a shadow of mercy. The boy receives a peaceful grave, while the rest of the cursed family faces a bloody end. So, our glorious nation, once united under David and shining under Solomon, is brutally torn apart, drowning in pure spiritual rot. Both Judah and Israel are locked into centuries of bloody struggle. We get brief sparks of hope, but this deep, festering wound will never be fully closed until both our kingdoms are crushed to dust and we are exiled. Up here in the north, I watch constant, violent shifts in power. While Judah fiercely protects David's bloodline, my home becomes a nightmare of coups, assassinations, and rival families stealing control. After Jeroboam, his son Nadab inherits the cursed throne, but his days are numbered. 1 Kings 15 records, Nadab, son of Jeroboam, became king over us in the 2nd year of Asa, king of Judah. He clung to power for only 2 bitter years. He embraced his father's suffocating sins, keeping my people trapped in this spiritual wasteland. Nadab wouldn't even survive to see his 3rd year in power. In the total chaos of battle, his own commander violently overthrew him. 1 Kings 15 states, Baasha of Issachar quietly plotted his murder. I was at Gibbethon when he struck our king down, right as we besieged the Philistine town. Baasha didn't just execute our king. He slaughtered every single soul in Jeroboam's family, exactly as Ahijah warned. 1 Kings 15 describes, once in power, he murdered Jeroboam's whole bloodline. He didn't leave a single breathing soul alive. He wiped them out completely, just as the chilling words spoken through Ahijah the Shilonite demanded. Even after watching this divine horror unfold, Baasha blindly walked the exact same corrupt path. 1 Kings 15 says, he did evil, perfectly mirroring Jeroboam, trapping my people in the exact same miserable cycle of national sin. Baasha ruled 24 years before his son Elah took over. But our bloody history quickly repeated itself. 1 Kings 16 notes that Elah, son of Baasha, took power over us in Asa's 26th year, but barely lasted 2 years in Tirzah. His reign ended violently at a drunken feast. 1 Kings 16 recounts how Zimri, his own official who commanded half the chariot forces, quietly plotted the brutal murder. While Elah was in Tirzah, hopelessly drunk inside his palace administrator's home, the traitor Zimri slipped in, slaughtered him, and stole the crown. And just like before, Zimri butchered Baasha's entire family, making another horrifying prophecy come true. 1 Kings 16 reports, "The second he sat on that bloody throne, he wiped out Baasha's entire living bloodline. He spared absolutely no one, neither relative nor friend." Yet Zimri's dark triumph lasted barely 7 days. Hearing of the treason, our army instantly crowned their commander. 1 Kings 16 says, "When our troops out in the camp heard Zimri had murdered the king, we immediately declared General Omri as true king." Now completely trapped inside the palace walls, Zimri realized it was over and chose a fiery end. 1 Kings 16 says, "Seeing the city fall, he retreated to the royal citadel, burning the entire palace down around his own head. And so he died." Even with Zimri dead, Omri still lacked immediate control. Half my people stubbornly supported another rival named Tibni. The text narrates, "Our nation was torn perfectly in two. Half wanted Tibni, son of Ganath, and the other half stood by Omri." I watched this bitter civil war tear us apart for 4 long years. Eventually, 1 Kings 16 says, the people following Omri crushed Tibni's loyalists. So Tibni died, and Omri ruled. He was a ruthless visionary, establishing our massive new capital, Samaria. 1 Kings chapter 16 explains it simply. He bought the hill of Samaria from Shemer for 2 silver talents. He built a massive city there, naming it Samaria after the hill's original owner. Despite his grand architecture, his soul was just as rotten as the others. 1 Kings 16 states, "Omri did worse evil than all who came before him. He locked us into the most stable dynasty the north had ever known." Then came Ahab, our ultimate nightmare. 50 agonizing years, 7 kings butchering each other for power. Look closely at us. Are we so different today? You and I know this dread, watching our world fracture. While Israel's throne became a revolving door of betrayal, Judah walked another path. We clung to an ancient promise, the divine vow that David's bloodline would hold the crown. After Rehoboam's heavy hand, his son Abijah took power. The ancient scrolls recorded, in Jeroboam's 18th year, Abijah claimed Judah's throne. For 3 years I lived under his shadow in Jerusalem. His reign brought no spiritual peace. The texts say he drowned in the exact same sins his father committed. I felt our identity slipping away. Abijah's heart was hollow, entirely unfaithful to the divine, completely unlike his ancestor David. Yet, against all odds, the Almighty honored his word. The ancient writings explain, despite everything, for David's sake, the Creator kept a single flame burning in Jerusalem, raising up his son and securing the holy city. When Abijah's brief dark rule ended, Asa took the crown, and suddenly, I felt hope breathe through our streets. The records tell us Asa did what was true and right, mirroring his father David. Asa went to war against our spiritual sickness. The ancient text reveals he drove out the corrupt and smashed every idol our ancestors had worshipped. He even stripped his grandmother Marker of her Queen Mother title because of her toxic idolatry. The scrolls document he deposed Marker, his own grandmother, from the throne because she crafted a grotesque idol to Asher. I watched our false gods fall. Asa dragged that twisted statue to the Kidron Valley and burned it to ash. He was flawed, sure, but his spirit clung to the divine. Still, the text warns, the high places remain. Even so, Asar's heart stayed loyal to the Creator for his entire life. After 41 long years, his son Jehoshaphat inherited our fractured kingdom. The historical accounts say Jehoshaphat was 35 when he took power, ruling Jerusalem for 25 years. He bravely carried on his father's righteous crusade. I saw him walk exactly in Asa's footsteps. The scriptures confirm he never strayed from that path, desperately doing what was pure and right in the eyes of the Almighty. But like his father, he left the hilltop shrines standing. The texts confess those forbidden high places were never fully torn down. And my people kept offering sacrifices and burning incense up there. Our deepest flaw was Jehoshaphat's dangerous new political alliance with the northern kingdom. The records note he made peace with Israel's king. That toxic compromise planted a seed of ruin, as our royal bloodline eventually mixed with Ahab's cursed house. While we in Judah found a fragile peace, the northern kingdom spiraled into a terrifying spiritual void under the rule of Ahab, son of Omri. The ancient scrolls declare Ahab's wickedness eclipsed everything before it. He committed unspeakable evil against the divine, pushing my brothers in the north into madness. Why was Ahab so much worse? He didn't just bow to the old golden calves, he dragged our people into an entirely new abyss of worship. The ancient scriptures say he treated the terrible sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, like a casual joke. Then came his ultimate betrayal. He married Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal. I felt pure terror. She was royalty from Sidon. Suddenly, Ahab was serving and worshiping Baal in the open. He didn't just quietly tolerate this dark religion. He pushed it on all of us. The records say he built a massive temple for Baal right in Samaria, erecting a pagan altar inside. He opened the doors to Asher, the fertility goddess. The chronicles state that Ahab carved a wooden idol with his own hands. Ahab provoked the Almighty's wrath deeper than any king before him. And in that lawless era, one man arrogantly challenged the ancient curse and decided to rebuild the ruins of Jericho. The historical texts reveal Hiel of Bethel rebuilt Jericho. He poured its foundation over the grave of his firstborn son, Abiram, and set the gates, at the cost of his youngest, Seg. It happened exactly as the divine warned through Joshua centuries ago. I watched ancient prophecy demand its blood price. Yet even this terrifying omen couldn't break Ahab's stubborn pride. For 22 years I watched the cult of Baal infect every corner of our desperate nation. But the true architect of our spiritual exile was Jezebel. As the daughter of Ethbaal, the priest king of Sidon, she carried a violent, fanatical obsession with Baal and Asher. Jezebel refused to keep her dark gods hidden behind closed doors. She hunted our holy men down. The ancient texts reveal that as Jezebel slaughtered the Lord's messengers, a man named Odiah hid 100 prophets, stashing them 50 to a cave, keeping them alive on mere bread and water. While silencing our truth, she elevated absolute lies. The records document 450 prophets of Baal and 400 for Asher dining at her personal table. 850 false voices, all funded by our own treasury. Idolatry was now the law. I saw her absolute grip on the king when they stole Naboth's vineyard. When Ahab couldn't buy that plot of land, he sank into a bitter depression. The scriptures say Jezebel approached him, asking why his spirit was crushed and his appetite gone. Once he whined about the vineyard, she seized the reins completely. The text records her mocking him. "Aren't you the king of Israel? Get up, eat, and cheer up. I will hand you the vineyard of Naboth, the Jezreelite." Then she engineered a deeply wicked psychological trap. The records show she forged letters in Ahab's name, stamping them with the royal seal. She mailed these death warrants to the elders in Naboth's own hometown. Inside, she demanded a fake religious trial. The scrolls detail her command. Declare a holy fast, put Naboth at the front of the crowd, and seat 2 scoundrels across from him to publicly lie. Have them swear he cursed God and the king. Then drag him out and stone him. The trap snapped shut. Naboth was murdered on a lie, and she tossed the bloody property to her husband. I realized then how ruthless she truly was. We still see leaders twist faith for power today, don't we? Her darkness hit its absolute peak after the Mount Carmel showdown. When Elijah finally humiliated Baal's prophets, she swore a bloody revenge. The ancient text recalls her sending a terrifying message to the holy man. May the gods strike me dead if I don't turn your life into a corpse like theirs by tomorrow. That pure psychological warfare was so paralyzing that even Elijah, despite his massive victory, ran for his life. Tell me, what foreign idols are you and I letting rule our own hearts today? Jezebel didn't just flood our land with idols. She brought a crushing tyranny that mocked our ancient laws. Everything felt lost. But in the crushing darkness of Ahab's reign, God pulled me out of obscurity. I was just Elijah. I didn't have a grand introduction. The record in Kings just shows me stepping from the shadows. I walked straight up to King Ahab. My heart pounded, but I told him, "As the Lord God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there won't be a single drop of dew or rain until I say so." It was a death sentence. I was openly challenging Baal, their fake god of storms and crops. Then the rivers dried up. I was a wanted man, totally alone. But God hid me by the brook Cherith, sending wild ravens to feed me. 1 Kings 17 records my survival. The ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening. He drank from the brook. Then my water turned to dust. God pushed me to Zarephath, where a starving widow took me in. There I witnessed 2 miracles. First, her flour and oil never ran out. Then I pulled her son back from death. 3 long years later, God ordered me back into the fire to face King Ahab, who blamed me for the famine. 1 Kings 18 captures that tense reunion. When the king spotted me, he sneered, "Is that really you, the troubler of Israel?" I stared right back at him. "I haven't brought ruin to Israel," I fired back. "You and your father's house did, because you threw away God's laws to chase after those Baals." Then I laid it all on the line. I demanded a final showdown on Mount Carmel against his false priests. The ancient text describes my terms. Bring all of Israel to Mount Carmel. Bring the 450 prophets of Baal and Jezebel's 400 prophets of Asherah. Let's settle this. Standing on that massive peak, I gave them a test to expose the truth. I told the crowd, "Bring us 2 bulls. Let them pick one. Let them chop it up and put it on the wood, but they must light no fire at all. I will prepare the other bull exactly the same way, placing it on the wood without a single spark. Then you call out to your God, and I will pray to the Lord, the God who answers with fire. He is the one true God." They took the bait and went first. They built their altar and screamed for Baal all morning long. 1 Kings 18 says, "At noon, I started mocking them. Yell louder! He's a god, right? Maybe he's lost in thought or taking a bathroom break or traveling. Or maybe he's just asleep and you need to wake him up." They lost their minds. The scriptures record how they wailed and slashed their own skin with swords and spears until blood soaked the ground beneath them. But nothing happened. Silence. No voice. No God cared about their bleeding. Finally, it was my turn to step forward. I carefully rebuilt God's ruined altar using 12 heavy stones, one for each tribe of Israel. And to make my point absolutely undeniable, I had them flood the altar with water until the wood was drenched and the trench overflowed. I was terrified, yet certain. I closed my eyes and prayed. O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, prove to them today that you are the only God in this land. Show them I am just your servant, doing this by your word. Answer me, Lord. Answer me so these broken people will finally understand who you are and know that you are calling their hearts home. The sky tore open. 1 Kings 18 says, "Then the fire of the Lord fell. It swallowed the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the dirt, and vaporized every drop of water in that trench." The crowd's reactions shook the mountain. 1 Kings 18 reads, "When all the people saw it, they fell on their faces screaming, 'The Lord is God! The Lord is God!'" The truth was finally exposed. Acting on pure adrenaline and holy law, I ordered the false priests destroyed. The text remembers my shout. "Grab the prophets of Baal! Don't let a single one slip away!" The crowd surged forward and seized them. I dragged them down to the Kishon Valley and ended them right there. Standing in the aftermath of that victory, I declared the drought was over. I climbed back up Carmel's peak, completely exhausted. I collapsed into the dirt, burying my face deep between my knees, begging the sky to finally open up. Black storm clouds rolled in, and the heavy rain finally hit. You and I might assume a triumph like that would leave me feeling untouchable, fearless. But the reality was entirely different. Jezebel sent a death threat, and my courage simply vanished. Kings 19 tells the ugly truth. When he saw that, he ran for his life to Beersheba in Judah and left his servant behind. I didn't just hide in Judah. I plunged deep into the wasteland, begging for death. The ancient record says, "But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and slumped down under a broom tree." I prayed to just die, whispering, "I've had enough, Lord. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors." Look closely, and you'll see my own broken humanity staring back. Even after calling down fire from heaven, I crashed into a suffocating depression. I truly thought that miracle on Carmel would trigger a massive spiritual awakening. But Jezebel's letter proved the toxic powers running Israel hadn't changed at all. Yet God didn't crush me for my weakness. 1 Kings 19 says, "As he slept under a broom tree, suddenly an angel touched him, saying, 'Get up and eat.'" I was given a warm meal and permission to rest. After sleeping and eating again, I found the strength to keep moving. The text recalls, "The angel of the Lord came back a second time, touched him and said, 'Get up and eat, because this journey is too heavy for you.' I forced myself up. I ate, drank, and ran on the fuel of that divine food for 40 days and 40 nights, straight to Horeb, the mountain of God. On that desolate crag of Sinai, the Lord found me hiding in a cave. He asked what I was doing. I just broke down, pouring out all my bitter isolation. 1 Kings 19 records my exact words. "I've fought so hard for the Lord God of hosts, but Israel has completely abandoned your ancient covenant. They smashed your altars and slaughtered your messengers. I'm the only one left, and now they are hunting me down to end my life. You and I have probably both felt that exact same paralyzing despair. But God answered my panic strangely. Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord. Then the Creator walked past. A terrifying hurricane ripped the mountainside apart, shattering massive boulders all around me. But God wasn't inside that violent, crushing wind. I stood there waiting. The wind howled. The earth shattered beneath my feet, but God wasn't in the rubble. Then flames tore through the mountain, but He wasn't in the fire. Then came a quiet, fragile whisper. God didn't show up in the chaos, not the storm, the quakes, or the blaze. My Creator met my deepest fear in total silence. That moment shattered my expectations. God doesn't always need dramatic fire from heaven like we saw at Mount Carmel. Sometimes He moves in the quiet shadows, through broken, ordinary people. The whisper gave me 3 massive burdens. I had to anoint Hazael over Syria and Jehu as king over Israel. And I had to replace myself. The command was clear. Anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, over Israel, and Elisha, son of Shaphat from Abel, as the one to carry my mantle. Elisha would take my place. But God also broke my isolation, proving I was dead wrong to think I was the only believer left alive. The scripture tells it like this. God had 7,000 people in Israel hidden away. 7,000 who refused to kneel to Baal or kiss his idol. You and I both know the crushing weight of loneliness. This news revived my soul. I wasn't fighting solo. Thousands shared my faith, living quietly under the radar. Pulled from the edge of despair, I headed back down the mountain. Finding my successor came first. The sacred text lays out my journey. I tracked down Elisha, son of Shaphat. He was out in the dirt plowing behind 12 pairs of oxen. I didn't say a word. I just walked past and tossed my heavy prophetic cloak right onto his shoulders. That simple, heavy piece of fabric carried my entire identity and calling. The young man instantly knew his old life was over. He abandoned his oxen and chased after me, begging, "Please let me kiss my father and mother goodbye, and then I will follow you." I told him, "Go back. Think about what I just did to you." But Elisha was ready to surrender his entire past. The text says he went back, took his oxen, and slaughtered them right there. He burned his wooden plows to cook the meat, handing it out to feed the people. Then he stood up, followed me, and became my servant. By turning his livelihood into ashes, he made sure he could never retreat to his comfort zone. He embraced his identity as my shadow. Meanwhile, our nation was crumbling. King Ahab had dragged Israel into a terrifying new conflict. Ben-Hadad of Syria wanted to crush us. It looked like politics, but it was really a spiritual rescue mission. God was fighting for a nation drowning in sin. The nightmare started when Ben-Hadad trapped Samaria with his massive troops. The ancient record shows the Syrian king assembling everything. 32 allied kings marched to our gates with endless horses and war chariots. They choked the life out of Samaria. Then the tyrant sent messengers to King Ahab, dripping with arrogance. The demand was brutal. "Your silver and gold belong to me. Even your wives and children are mine." Sickeningly, our king folded. The scripture records Ahab caving into the fear. Ahab told him, "I and everything I own are yours." But surrender wasn't enough for Ben-Hadad. He sent orders that his men would raid the palace and strip us of anything we loved. Driven to desperation, our king finally asked the elders, who told him to stand firm. So Ahab sent back a shaky message to the Syrian warlord. "I will pay the first tribute, but this new demand I refuse." Ben-Hadad exploded into a furious rage, making terrifying threats. He swore by his pagan gods, screaming that his massive army would grind Samaria into so much dust they couldn't even scoop a handful. But our king actually fired back with a sharp, ancient proverb. He warned the tyrant, "Do not let the warrior lacing up his armor brag like the veteran taking it off." You and I know that premature pride usually ends in ruin. Right then, another prophet stepped out of the shadows to give Ahab an unthinkable message. He spoke God's truth directly. "Have you seen this massive horde? Watch, because I am handing them over to you today. Then you will finally know my true identity." Ahab demanded to know how. The prophet told him our rescue would come through young, totally untested local officers, completely bypassing the regular military forces. This bizarre battle plan proved one thing: our survival depended entirely on heaven, not our own pathetic weapons. Following the voice of God, Ahab deployed 232 rookie commanders backed by a tiny militia of 7,000. They marched out at high noon. Meanwhile, Ben-Hadad and his arrogant allies were hammered, drinking themselves blind in their tents, completely convinced they were untouchable. When scouts warned the Syrian king that our men were advancing, he laughed it off. He slurred his orders. "If they want peace, capture them alive. And if they want war, take them alive anyway." But he miscalculated. Our young officers started ripping through the Syrian lines. The record is clear. These untested kids marched out with a small militia behind them and brutally struck down every single target. Utter chaos erupted. The mighty Syrians panicked and ran, their king fleeing on a horse. We won an impossible battle, just as God promised. But the prophet warned our king that Ben-Hadad would strike again the following year. He told him, "Build up your defenses and prepare your soul, because when spring breaks, the Syrian Empire is coming back for blood." The enemy generals tried to explain away their humiliating defeat. They claimed my God was merely a mountain deity, so they planned to fight us on flat ground. They convinced themselves our power only worked in the hills, making us unbeatable up high. But down in the valleys, they thought they would crush us. They completely restructured their military strategy, swapping out entitled kings for hardened combat veterans. Ben-Hadad listened, pulling together another massive legion to attack on the plains. Once more, a faithful prophet met Ahab with a promise of deliverance. Stick with me. This is where the truth cuts deep. God said, because they called me a local spirit restricted to the hills and powerless below, I will hand this endless mob over to you, proving I am the creator of everything. For 7 agonizing days, both armies stared each other down. Then it started. We crushed them. In one day, we wiped out 100,000 soldiers, proving God isn't ancient history. He still fights for your identity today. The survivors fled to Aphek, where collapsing walls crushed 27,000 men. My enemy, Ben-Hadad, cowered in the city's dark corners. His panicked servants pushed him to surrender. They whispered in the dark, "We have heard the kings of Israel are merciful. Let us throw ourselves upon his mercy. Let's wear sackcloth and tie ropes around our heads," they urged. "If we crawl to Israel's king, perhaps he will spare your life." Ben-Hadad surrendered. Instead of striking him down, I felt this strange pride. I called him brother. He promised to return the cities his father stole. "You can build your own marketplaces in Damascus," he pleaded. Trapped by my own ego, I agreed. "On these terms, I will let you go." I signed the treaty and released him. But God watched my compromise. A prophet stepped forward, using a chilling story to condemn my weak leniency. The prophet stared right through me. Because you freed the man God marked for destruction, your life will pay for his, your people for his people. I rode home to Samaria, heavy and furious. God gave me the military victory, yet I still refused to bow entirely to his supreme will. I stubbornly resisted full obedience. While God shielded my kingdom from external Syrian armies, the true spiritual rot was festering deep inside me. Naboth's vineyard exposed the internal rot devouring my soul. It all started with a seemingly harmless craving. Naboth, the Jezreelite, owned a beautiful vineyard right next to my winter palace in Jezreel. I obsessed over it every single day. I approached him, casual at first. "Give me your vineyard for a garden," I said. "It is right beside my palace. It belongs to me. I will give you a better piece of land. Or if you want silver, I will pay your price." I thought I was making a fair offer. Cash or trade, it did not matter. Naboth looked me in the eye and refused. "The Lord forbid I sell my ancestors' inheritance," he firmly declared. Have you ever felt that sting of rejection? By our ancient law, his family's land was a sacred inheritance, never to be sold away. He was just being faithful to God's covenant. But my royal pride was utterly crushed. I dragged myself home, sullen and burning with rage over his rejection. Like a bitter child, I threw myself onto my bed and refused to eat. Queen Jezebel walked in. Seeing me sulk in the dark, she sneered at my sudden, pathetic weakness. "Is this how the great king of Israel acts?" she hissed. "Get up, eat something. I will hand you Naboth's vineyard myself." To Jezebel, royal power was absolute. She despised our sacred moral limits. If I wanted something, I should take it. So she spun a cruel plan. She forged letters in my name, stamping them with my royal seal. Then she dispatched them to the elders in Naboth's hometown. In those letters, she ordered a rigged trial. "Call a holy fast," she wrote, "and give Naboth a seat of high honor among his peers. Then plant 2 scoundrels across from him to swear he cursed God and the king. After that, drag him outside and stone him to death." The corrupt city leaders obeyed her without a single question. Those nobles followed my wife's letters perfectly. They staged a fake religious trial, brought in false witnesses, and trapped an entirely innocent man. They condemned Naboth for a crime he never committed. The heavy stones crushed him to death. When Jezebel finally got the bloody report, she found me and smiled. "Get up and claim that vineyard he refused to sell you. Naboth is no longer a problem. He is dead." I rushed down to seize the land, staining my own hands with murder. I didn't even ask how it became mine so conveniently fast. But heaven misses nothing. God saw it all and sent the prophet Elijah to confront me. The Lord told him, "Go down and meet King Ahab. He is standing in Naboth's vineyard right now, eagerly taking possession of his bloody prize. Ask him this," God commanded. "Have you murdered a man just to steal his land? And then deliver my final word of crushing divine judgment. Where dogs licked Naboth's blood, dogs will lick your blood, Ahab." When I saw Elijah walking toward me, terror completely paralyzed my chest. "Have you found me, my enemy?" I choked out. Elijah didn't blink. He brought the hammer down. "I have found you," he thundered, "because you completely sold yourself to do evil. God will bring absolute calamity upon you, wiping out your descendants. Every male in my house will fall." The verdict was absolute. My royal dynasty would be erased from the earth. cursed like the ruined kings before me. I had traded my soul to foreign idols and let an innocent man die for some dirt. Elijah wasn't finished. He had a horrifying, specific prophecy reserved just for my wife Jezebel. "Dogs will devour Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel," he declared. "Any one of my line dying in the city goes to the dogs, in the fields to the birds." I couldn't even argue. This horrific judgment was entirely deserved. History would remember me as the king who sold his soul. Pushed by Jezebel, I chased worthless idols and committed absolute abominations before the Lord. I acted worse than the ancient pagans. But standing there, totally broken, I finally felt genuine remorse. Hearing my doom, I ripped my royal clothes. I wrapped my body in scratchy sackcloth, refused food, and wandered my palace like a hollow ghost. And somehow, the Creator of the universe noticed my tears. He spoke to Elijah again. "Have you seen how Ahab humbles himself before me?" God asked. "Because he finally broke his pride, I will delay the disaster. Not in his lifetime, but in his son's days, I will bring the disaster." You and I both carry heavy guilt. Yet my story proves that even the most corrupt soul can find God's mercy through true repentance. I knew the doom was merely delayed. Watching the king steal Naboth's vineyard, I felt the sickening rot tearing through our nation's soul. The courts meant to protect ordinary people like me became weapons. The elite used the law to crush us into the dust. The ancient boundaries of God were erased. My friends could be slaughtered tomorrow just because a bored king wanted an extra garden. Yet in my deepest despair, a solitary prophet's voice pierced the dark. He reminded us all that heaven's scales had not broken. Everyone pays their debt to God eventually. I watched Ahab meet his brutal end, exactly as foretold. We had 3 quiet years. Then Ahab dragged Judah into a foolish war for Ramoth-Gilead, completely ignoring the prophet Micaiah's grim warning. I watched Ahab discard his royal robes, hiding from his fate. In 1 Kings chapter 22, a random arrow found the tiny gap in his armor. They propped him up, bleeding out, to keep us fighting. By sunset, our arrogant king was dead. They washed his ruined chariot in Samaria's pool. Dogs drank his blood, just as Elijah promised. His son Ahaziah took the cursed throne, continuing the sickening idol worship that haunted my northern homeland. Our tribes, once beautifully united under David and Solomon, were torn apart. I felt my kingdom drowning in a fatal cycle of bloodshed and false gods, racing toward our own total destruction. To the south, despite facing their own heavy burdens, they clung to David's bloodline and tasted genuine spiritual awakenings. And now, you and I reach the close of this ancient book. Stepping into the pages of 1 Kings broke me open. We walked through torn nations, faced tyrannical rulers, stood with prophets, and witnessed fire. Did you feel the terror of losing your identity? The spiritual exile my people faced is yours today. What God did then, He does now. He still speaks into our deepest isolation, hunting for faithful hearts. If surviving this ancient psychological journey moved you, please share it. Hit the like button and send this to friends battling their own modern wilderness. Your simple share might be the exact lifeline someone needs. We are far from finished with the story. The map of our spiritual history continues. Subscribe to the channel right now. Tap the bell, and let's uncover these forgotten texts together. Drop a comment below. Which moment of my people's deep struggle struck your soul? Was it the terrifying fire on Carmel? Naboth's lonely courage, or heaven's shocking mercy toward a monster like Ahab? Stay faithful out there. May God bless your week.